Good evening, everyone. So very warm welcome to Astonishing Evening's 10th event. And tonight's event is entitled Could Estonia Become a P-Ethic Success Story? So briefly, because we're gonna have a long evening ahead, just briefly about Astonishing Evenings. My name is Tambur and I'm the editor-in-chief of Estonian World, which is an English language magazine about Estonia, and it is the most popular and engaging English language web magazine about Estonia. But about Astonishing Evenings, we started last spring, and it's private initiative. It was started by 4 like-minded individuals. We all lived abroad at some point in our lives. And what we missed in Tallinn was sort of international event where both Estonians and people of Estonia can meet with people who have come to live in Estonia in the last 5, 10, 15 years or in last months. And so the idea is that both communities or different communities learn more about each other and can mingle and also do networking, etc. We've had 9 different topics so far, touched Estonian history, culture, working culture, etc. And tonight we are going to touch the topic of Estonian, or relations between Estonians and Estonian Russians. Many people who have come to live in Estonia recently don't know very well the history of this country, or if they know, they don't understand. Sometimes they ask, why? What problems have you had between those 2 communities? And this is the reason why we decided to organize this event. And I'm glad to see these our most popular event ever. We never had the trouble of not accommodating people, so we've had to actually bring extra chairs. And first, just a couple of questions for the audience so we get a clear picture. Marju, Lauristin is our first distinguished guest here. She's here. What we would like to establish is, first, how many of you here are from elsewhere, outside Estonia? Okay. How many of you are Estonians? And how many of you are from the Estonian Russian community? Okay. So those of you who have come from abroad, how do you know, okay, how shall I ask this? Do you know much about Estonian history at all? Or, okay, raise your hands if you know the history of Estonian history. Okay, few. Do you know anything about the Estonian Russian community or the history between those 2 communities? Right. So, okay, so hence, obviously, quite a few people who would like to know more. And this is why we have invited here Marju Lauristin. She will start this event. And I'll just briefly introduce you, Marju. She is a truly legendary lady in Estonia. She co-founded Rahvarinne, which was the Popular Front of Estonia in 1988, which was a major force in the Estonian independence movement that led to the re-establishment of Republic of Estonia in 1991. She was also a Minister of Social Affairs from 1992 to 1994, during the first years of our independence. She was a member of Estonian Parliament and also a member of European Parliament quite recently, and now she's currently a professor emeritus at the University of Tartu. She's been very active in Estonian society and politics in the last long time, 50 years at least, actually a bit longer, but at least before we became independent, it's about 40 years. So I'm really happy to introduce Marju here on stage, and she will speak about past, present, and future of the Estonian Russian community and also Estonians and so the integration policies. We will take some questions as well. She will speak about 20 minutes. We'll take some questions. Just raise your hand. Try to be as specific and short as possible when you ask questions. But please Stage is yours.
But the effect of that really was that those people who were have come to Estonia during this occupation time, and their children and later grandchildren, they were tackled as any other immigrant. What they in practice they were, even if they didn't know all that when they came here. And though they had to go through application procedure to apply for citizenship, to have naturalization process, and it was like it was before the war, not taking into account this new situation. Sociologists try to explain that we have to take into account the different situation, different group, different people, make it more flexible, open up, and that. But politically, in the first decade, it was very, very, very improbable to have any change passed. Now we have a situation in practice that we have around 1.3 million of population. We have Russian speakers, not Russians only, Russian speakers, 330,000. Huh? And then we have 60,000 not Russians. And from all those, more than half now are citizens. But then there is about 1/3 of those who are citizens of Russian Federation. Because Russian Federation made a move in the beginning of the first decade to open the Russian Federation citizenship to all people around Russia in other countries who were belonging to Russian, say, nationality. They were defined as belonging to Russian nation, and then they got very easily Russian citizenship. And as Estonian citizenship law was in this sense quite strict, that like in majority of other countries, the precondition for citizenship was to know language. Then it was much more easier to have Russian Federation citizenship because those people all were speaking Russian. Present-day situation is, as I said, that more than half are Estonian citizens, about 1/3, a bit less, are Russian Federation citizens, and then there is a leftover, about 80,000 people, as I understand, who are not Estonian citizens because they didn't want to apply, or they applied and didn't pass language test, or they don't like to have any kind of defined citizenship because they have in the European Union privilege. So-called citizens of the third countries who are permanent residents of European Union have all rights of freedom of movement, the labor market and everything, and at the same time they have free pass to Russian side to visit their relatives, neighbors, and so on. Though we have in practice now problem with around 50,000 maybe people who really want to be Estonian citizens and haven't passed the exam, or don't like the exam, or cannot learn the language because they are old, and so on. The whole practical problem now connected with citizenship in Estonia concerns this about 50,000 people, not 400,000 like sometimes Russian propaganda is talking. But the problem certainly is not only in citizenship. The real problem is a real integration. The real integration, what I mean by that? I mean that people who belong to the same society feel that they really belong to this society. They feel the kind of common identity. They feel some kind of responsibility for the country. They trust the country to some extent, like in normal democratic society, you cannot expect 100% trust, never. Then it's not democratic society. But so that there will not be dramatic differences in this kind of attitudes between Estonian majority and integrated minority. And also the problem is about understanding each other, meaning that these Russian speakers have learned Estonian language, understand Estonian history, culture, and so on. And Estonians can communicate with them in Estonian language, discussing politics, that people are reading the same newspaper, looking at the same TV, can discuss the same problems. Unfortunately, still, the situation is not like that. We have made in our university, year by year, integration research. Estonia have passed 3, now it's 4th national integration program, which is official integration policy of the state. And as a result of this official integration policy, as I said, from one side we have this increased level of citizenship, yes. Then we have increased level of knowledge of Estonian language, but it's not satisfactory because still, if you take the middle-aged and older population, very big part barely understand, if ever, or speak but with difficulties. And it is very important that on the labor market, it is showing up that those people who don't speak language, they are really in much more weaker position to have good jobs and so on, because in the real job situation, they cannot cope with this more complicated and qualified tasks. And then now I will say we have come to new situation. I will say that maybe last 5, 6 years, in Estonian society, whole discourse of integration have changed. If up to that, really up to this so-called bronze soldier, very dramatic event, it was in 2007 when there was this history with the monument of the Russian soldier removed from the central square to the cemetery, and then there was the thing which really in Western cities is everyday life, but in Estonia it was the first and happily last time, and there was some kind of riot on street. And after that, really, Estonian society really was awakened, understand that real integration is not some kind of European, say, formal thing. And it's not only about learning language at school. It's not about making some tests. It's not about voting on elections. It's much, much more. It's about real living together in the same society, being interested in this society and each other, and going further, having the common troubles, common problems, solving them together, and participating in this society. And so now we have like this new understanding emerging. And for example, in the area of education, there is now almost consensus between different political parties that we have to finish with this separation of children during education in schools. We still have purely Russian language school with Estonian education for some percentage, even more than they have formally in Estonian language, but still the whole language of school life, the school culture is still completely Russian-based. It's Russian. And then we have the called Estonian schools, which have different school culture with the whole Estonian language education and so on. And then we have some schools which are really so-called international schools, couple of them, and then we have some so-called special language schools like English College or France Lycée, but in general, the all educational system is divided between two languages. Now there is, as I said, almost a common understanding that that is a really reproduction of this segregation or division in society, generation after generation. And that we have to bring all children in one school, have to bring this all children in really Estonian school, meaning that all kids will be free in Estonian, in the language of this country, not certainly forgetting own mother tongue, having also opportunity to have lessons and learning own history and own language. And here, what is a problem is a practical problem, because it's nice to think about that. And the law about integration in school is also quite old, but the problem is with teachers. Who could be the teachers who come and are capable to teach kids in one class from different cultures? And you may wonder, because if you go to Sweden or you to go UK or you to go to any other country, then it's quite common thing. You see in any class kids from different cultures, different colors, different home languages, sitting together, having the same classes, discussing the same things. In Belgium, if Estonia go to Brussels to work, then Estonian kids from 3-year-old go to Belgian school. They learn there momentary. In a couple of months, they speak freely French or Flemish. It depends in which area of Brussels they're living. And then they have their home, some language or Estonian language exercises in the Estonian school or classes and so on. It's all like part of everyday life in Europe for a long time. But here we just are starting to bring kids together. We are starting to involve then young people to prepare themselves to be teachers in those multicultural classes. Starting from kindergarten, and we understand that could be much more complicated process than just having some nice propaganda and having some formal tests and having some legislation changed. It's a real situation of everyday life. And that is the other side, is the labor market. Because we have until now, for example, in Ida-Virumaa, and not so much in Tallinn, but also in Tallinn, situation where there is a Russian language owner, Russian language employer, and he's having workers or employees all Russian language. And situation in this sense, it's not better for these workers, it's worse. Because when we compare, for example, the rights, social rights in these Russian language industries, then they are lower. If you look at the salaries, they are lower than average, because workers who are in this one language and say closed situation, they feel that they cannot have free choice. They cannot find work somewhere in other place because they are locked in this one language situation. Whereas normally in Estonian industries and Estonian companies, they are multilingual. They are very much multilingual. There are a lot of English-speaking ownership. There are a lot of multilingual and multicultural employment. But there are this kind of like ghettos or segregated islands in labor market, which is also a problem. So in this sense, we are now, I would say, maybe, now the first new period where whole society is involved and really interested in this integration issue, not only politically or legally, but really socially and culturally. I suppose that's very important, and that's quite difficult, because the attitudes from both sides during these times of quite a segregated existence, they are also quite different. As we are doing, as I said, this kind of research whole time, I will say that among the Russian language-speaking population, maybe there is 1/4, maybe even a bit less, of people whom we can say that they are fully, in this sense, fully integrated in the sense that for them it's not a problem anymore. And it's not problem also for any people, any Estonian or other language people, to have with them all kind of communication and contacts like Estonians, because they are not, say, different from any other people. But then there are still the other groups who are not so fluent in language, who are not so, say, involved in everyday life and participating, with different attitudes, starting from those whom we call that they are mostly older people, very nice, very integrated by attitudes, very, say, patriotic concerned Estonia, but just they haven't passed exam and they don't have citizenship. And with them, I suppose we will have this solution, and a lot of politicians are working that really to accommodate our very, really strict citizen rules, so that those people who really are, by their, say, attitudes, ready to fully be integrated as citizens, they will have this opportunity. But then we have this group of Russian citizenship. And this is not a small group, it's about 100,000 people. They are voting for Putin. They can vote on Russian elections. They are watching only Russian Moscow-produced television. And they are living in Estonia just like on island. They are not participating in Estonian life almost at all. And that's a situation which is not even, it's not, how to say, it's difficult to describe the situation even, because it is so close to existence. And then there are groups who are in between. For example, there are active young people who don't care, who just want to go to the West, abroad. They feel that they are in open world, they belong to the Europe, and they are not interested in being some part of Estonian society. There are different things, but anyway, the difference, this is normal difference. The goal what is now set is that when we now look at this new generations, the kids and the new generation, then that maybe after 10 years or 15, we will not have any more this kind of integration problem in this old sense at all. But from other side, I will have to say that we could be also quite proud about what we have done here, how we have been living here. Why? Because we practically haven't had, with exception of this one night in April 2007, we haven't had violent conflicts. Yes, we have, say, young people are having their, on the courtyard or street, like everywhere, some, say, fights, but we never have had any violent exclusion. With this night, there was almost none window never broken, by none of stones thrown. If there was this kind of occasion somewhere, then it was immediately made very big issue in media, by people. So Estonia have really managed to avoid the worst events or worst developments, which really was expected. I remember in 90s how Western journalists came to Estonia on certain, say, days, and they went to Narva or they went to some place in Tallinn expecting to have good videos, good broadcasts about conflicts. And then they were disappointed. And they said, oh, nothing happened. We have no production could be made. You are living in this sense too silently. Why you don't have clashes? Why you don't have burned cars? Why you don't have people shouting on streets? We said that Russians don't like it. Russians living in Estonia, Estonians don't like it. We are peaceful people, you know. and that, I suppose that have been real, in this sense, real good thing. Even in the most difficult years, even in years of hunger, of very big poverty, which was in the beginning of 90s after we were breaking with Soviet Union, even in these years, we didn't have, in this sense, any ethnic violence. Yes, we have problems, we have emotions, we have fears, we have attitudes, but we don't have fights, we don't have terror, we don't have violence, we don't have, in this sense, this kind of society with the kind of atmosphere of fear and hatred. And I'm sure that Estonians really cherish this as a very, very big value. And knowing a lot of Russians living here, I would say that also our Russians cherish this atmosphere. And I suppose that's the main prerequisite to solve the problems we have, because certainly we have problems, and big problems, but I hope very much they will never evolve in problems we can see in TV, on streets of Paris, London, or other nice Western capitals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marju, for this perfect introduction to our topic event. You raised many questions, and my apologies for focusing on the politics. Actually, thousands and thousands of Estonians have studied and at the University of Tartu under Marju, and including hundreds of journalists. So, but yeah. We're gonna take some questions, and by the way, many of those topics that Marju just raised, we are going to discuss them in detail again during our panel, which will start after the break. And we've invited here Sergei, Metlev, Artemy, Troitsky, Marianna, Makarova, and Vladimir, Svet, and Marju will also join with them at the panel. So we're gonna discuss, but right now we're happy to take a few questions. So just raise your hand and try to be as specific as possible. We're obviously limited with time, so thank you. Member of our team will bring a mic to you.
Okay, let's start here.
Oh, okay. Hello, thank you for the great talk. My question is that when you started the first integration project in '97, if I'm not wrong, then did you have any examples that you looked forward to, for example, other regions or other countries as models that you looked at? And presently, do you feel, aside from Estonia, are there any other regions or countries which have faced similar problems like Estonia had, and they are much more ahead in currently right now? Thank you.
So just let me clarify. Did you say the integration project at what year did you say?
I think it was started in '97. If
1997.
Yes.
Okay. And so in 1997, the integration project, and sorry, what? Can you just
that Marju was a part of for the first time. I'm just wondering that when they started the project, did they look at some other examples, some other countries?
Other countries, okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of integration, did you look at some other countries and the experiences?
We looked at Canada. We looked at Canada because Canada have the very, very long and successful history of integration policies, and also they have had it as an academic topic also for decades. And they have theories and models and political alternatives of integration. John Berry, if this name can tell you, was one of classics of this area. And from that, we really built up the model for integration, which was based on this individual free choice, empowerment of people to make this choice, learning language, learning all practices, and also looking at the different ways of integration, not trying to put everybody in the same situation, not making all people similar, but having like different models. Then when we compare with other East European countries, then it's very difficult because very similar situation with us is in Latvia, certainly, because in Latvia there was the same situation like in Estonia. In Soviet time, the big invasion or big influx of the working and military people from Russia, and the part of them left with Russian militaries from Estonia. By the way, 64,000 Russian-speaking people left with demilitarization. They were Russian militaries and their families. 64,000. It was huge garrison for a country with 1.4 million population. So Latvia in this sense was comparable. And with Latvia, we have exchanged our integration, experiences. But Estonia have gone a bit of different way than Latvia also, because in Estonian economy, and Estonian politics, we didn't have this phenomenon of oligarchs. What Latvia had, the oligarchs were the millionaires and banks connected with Russia's economy, and then also trying to catch power. So we didn't have in Estonia this kind of oligarchs. And if now you look at the other Eastern European or Central European countries, then as I have been in Council of Europe, in the Expert Advisory Committee for Minority Protection in Europe, and I have traveled along Europe in different countries. Then if you go, for example, to Hungary, or you go to Romania and so on, there they have the minority problems, but the most difficult things are connected with Roma. it's not comparable to Estonian problems, not at all. There are some difficult and complicated issues of political nature, for example, in Romania with Hungarian minority, which could be compared in some way. Because as in Romania, this Hungarian minority is feeling belonging to the previous, say, like more advanced and dominating and powerful part of the population. I will say that also among our Russian population, at least in the first decade, there were a lot of people who felt that being part of big nation and being majority in Soviet Union, they now are like pressed in a small country, and then they are not used to be minority in a small country. It is like not acceptable. But it's not exactly the same. So I will say that in this sense, Estonia and Latvia are quite unique. And even Lithuania is a bit different, because in Lithuania you have this minority divided between Polish and Russian. And for Lithuania, even Polish minority in some way is much more complicated challenge than Russian one. So in this sense, Estonia and Latvia are quite unique.
Okay. Thank you.
Here.
Yeah, another
you can
question.
also introduce yourself very quickly, where you're from.
Hello, my name is Jan. I'm from the Netherlands. And from what I understand about integration in Estonia is that for the first 10, 15 years, as you mentioned, it was quite difficult politically to get any reforms passed. And from my understanding, the first 10 or 15 years, as Estonia wanted to join the EU, NATO, OECD, it was these multilateral organizations which influenced Estonia a little bit and offered advice and asked them to do certain things. Now I have two short questions. The first of which is if there's anything, one big thing that you look back that you would say we should have done differently. And my second question is related to what my colleague just now said. If Estonia is a model, what would it export to a country like Bosnia and Herzegovina, where you also have people living past each other, they vote for different people, they don't feel part of one country. So one big thing you might change, and how is Estonia a model? What would you export? Thank you.
So the first question is there something you could do differently now if you could? And I think before the question you indicated that a lot of international organizations applied pressure on Estonia rather than it was sort of natural, organic progress.
You see, when I look back at this beginning of our independence, can you imagine the country which was 50 years occupied, which didn't have any own institutions in economy, for example? Big part of industry was just part of Russian military industry. Big industries in Tallinn, in Sillamäe, in Narva were part of Russian military industry. We didn't have in many areas own legislation. It was so-called all Soviet legislation. We didn't have, in this sense, own constitution of independent country. So we had to build it all up from the scratch. And here we had this kind of like help and assistance from European lawyers. We had from European, not from EU at first, from European Council, then later on from EU lawyers who came and then like helped us or brought in the models for legislation. But the legislation is not changing the life, In order to change the life, you have to go into people's minds, and people should understand and be motivated to change. And in the first, I will honestly say, the first 5 years, majority of Estonians really were expecting that these people who came 20, 30 years ago, because as I said, I saw in Tallinn with my own eyes how new suburbs were built up and the new population really emerged, what wasn't there when I was in say, 5th or 7th or 9th grade. Then it was like normal for Estonia to think that now, after Estonia gains back independence, at first all Estonians which are abroad, in Sweden, in Canada, in America, will come back at home. Because that's a normal thing for Estonian. Estonians are very, say, homey people. We like to be at home. We prefer to be at home for anything else. And we were expecting that all Estonians would return home, that we will have those 100,000 Estonians which have got good education and money and everything in the West will return to home, and we will rejoin with our Estonian other people, so-called Estonians abroad. And the same logic we apply to Russians. As they have been brought also away from their homes, then now in new situation they are free to return to their homelands, and then everybody was expecting that it would be peaceful process. And then it emerged that yes, 64,000 left with army, those who are connected with militaries, but majority of others said that, oh, we really like Estonia, we like to be here. And then we had in 97 this program with this lot of nice people around. Look at them. so that it was an awakening call that look, we are now together. They didn't leave. We are not leaving. And our compatriots from Sweden and then Canada and America, they are not interested to come home. And then it started. And then yes, we had the help. First program was made with the help of Nordic Council, not with the EU, but with Nordic Council. Nordic Council gave money and expertise. First program was started with help of Nordic Council. And then it went on when we were called to the European integration process, becoming candidate country. Then since 97 also, 98, then already there was much more strict rules, and then we got their juridical help and so on. So and international organizations, some of them also were involved, but mostly if you are from Netherlands, as I understand, then we got more very, very good help and networking with not so much people dealing with minorities, but more on social field. I myself, I was involved in the Dutch network of the voluntary work, helping people in need and so on, what now had become the food bank. But we started already in 1995 with Dutch funds helping people who were in need. Now about model. I have been in Bosnia and in previous Yugoslavia when I was this Council of Europe committee. And I have to say that there could be from outside looking like different, but like several common situations, but it's very, very different from both the countries. And we are quite, say, always disturbed when people coming from that, oh, Balkan and Baltic and Bal, it's all the same. No, it's not the same. and at first we didn't have war, because the Yugoslavian situation is post-war situation. We didn't have any kind of in there, as I said, even a minor, this kind of militant or violent conflict. And then also involvement of Estonians or Latvians or Armenians or Georgians in this huge Soviet Union was a different kind than the Yugoslavia, which was before this breakup. From both sides, in Yugoslavia a lot of things were better, they were economically better, they had more freedoms, but also in Yugoslavia there were different kind of this post-war situation, different kind of all those things. So it's very, very a different culture, very, very different culture. Because in Yugoslavia you have a mixture of Catholics, Muslims, and a bit of Lutherans. In Estonia we have very clear division. Estonians are Lutherans and the Russians are Orthodox. And most of Estonians are not at all religious. They have no say, connection with the church. So in this sense we are much more cool. Not so religious, not so emotionally involved in all those things, and don't have this military path.
Thank you. We are going to carry on with questions later, I'm afraid, because we just have a limited time. Marju will join the panel later on. We can ask questions, but first off, let's have a warm applause for Marju. We have a question for you as well. So if we can have our colleague here to get this question on the screen. Can everyone see it? Aha, okay. So we've got a question for you. On a scale from 0 to 10, how likely do you think that Estonia will ever have an ethnic Estonian Russian president? And how you see on your tables there are little buttons and a sort of glass surface. When you move those buttons up, it will go up to 10, and when it's down, it's 1. So choose the likeliness. Obviously, the higher you move the button, the more chance there will be an Estonian Russian president. And so we'll calculate the average. I think table 12 right at the back might have an issue with it, but all the others will work. Just a few minutes for this. Okay, I think we've got our average, roughly about 5. So roughly somewhere in the middle, in between. Okay, so we're going to have a little break, 10 minutes, and after that we're going to carry on with the panel, and we have 5 distinguished guests. Marju will join the panel, and we've got Artemy, Troitsky, Marianna, Makarova, Sergei, Metlev, and Vladimir, Svet. So see you soon. Thank you.
Scotch on ice, please.
Big one.
one gin tonic? Please, okay. Big one.
halb võib lava pealt näha läheb, et midagi siukest. Kunagi oli mingi siuke teema, et mõned mikrofonid ei lähe publikusse.
Ei tohiks olla.
Ei tohiks olla.
Ma viin paneelile ära, jah? Sa tahaks ühte veel või? Siin on siis jagamiseks 2 mikrofoni, et siis niimoodi.
Tema juhib.
Vaata kohe kõrvalt sinna. Sa näed mind paremini.
Svet. So I'm going to sit here. Is that all right? It's only because
You want to sit here
if I could sit here and you
and move me over there?
yeah, would that be okay?
And that's
It's
better.
only because I see my team member from here. Sorry. I'm bringing you all.
Shit happens. Nice to see you.
Hello, hello. If you can take a seat again and make yourself comfortable, we're gonna carry on with the panel now. So I'm happy to introduce our panelists. I already introduced Marju, but I'll go with the alphabetical order. We have Marianna Makarova. Marianna is a strategic communication advisor at the Government Office of Estonia, and she has also worked at the Estonian Integration Foundation as the head of research development.
And she's psychologist.
And she's psychologist. Fine. I'm making it too complicated, it seems. Well, I did want to mention that she is a PhD student as well, is that right? Of the Tallinn University, and her research focus on ethnic and state identity, bicultural identity, and inclusiveness of integration context. The concept of Estonian open identity, is that correct? Yeah. It means a state identity equally acceptable for Estonians as well as representatives of ethnic minorities in Estonia has been an important inspiration for her research. Next, Sergei Metlev. Sergei is a Tallinn-born Estonian Russian who started his public career as a public speaker for the integration of Russian-speaking youth and reforms in local Russian school systems. He was one of the leaders of countrywide youth association Open Republic that is helping to integrate Russian-speaking youth to the Estonian society and cultural sphere. He has also an experience in participating in politics. He was also a candidate for the Estonian parliament and worked as a political advisor at the parliament. After leaving the active politics, Metlev joined the Estonian Institute of Historical Memory, that is a scientific research and history education organization. So he's managing public relations there. Artemy Troitsky is a Russian-born journalist, music critic, concert promoter, broadcaster, and an academic who has lived with his family in Estonia for the past 4 years. Troitsky is a well-known critic of Vladimir Putin's regime, and as a man who left his homeland for social and political reasons. Among many of his opinion articles for the Estonian media, he has also criticized the divide between Estonian and Russian-speaking communities in Estonia. Vladimir Svet is the head of Tallinn City Central Administration since November 2017, and he's also a member of the Center Party. And He has worked also as a specialist in the Culture and Youth Department of Tallinn City Centre Administration. So, we start. Also, remind you, we have a Slido. Anyone who has used Slido knows what it is. Who doesn't, it's if you go slido.com and you enter, there's a hashtag and you enter number 1510 and press join. You will then, it will open up our event page and you can type questions through Slido. And my colleague Relika will keep an eye on those questions. And she will ask those questions in sort of every 15 or 20 minutes as well from the panelists. And also we can take questions from the audience, but we have many topics, so we'll see how it goes. But let's start with you, Sergei. And just following up what Marju already obviously gave a very lengthy presentation, very substantial, touched many topics. You went to Estonian kindergarten, is that correct?
That's right.
And how would you, if you can briefly just comment on, from your personal perspective, what's right, what's wrong with integration?
Well, basically, actually, Marju, well, you described all the important topics, the Russian school, the Russian language, and the citizenship, and so on. And actually, I would like to mark a bit more philosophical approach to the question, because we'll discuss, I think, this technical reasons and so on for 1 hour. There is one problem, actually, beyond local Russians. This is the problem of dealing with their past by themselves. This is the thing that where the Estonian state, official state, maybe can help a bit, but not enough. Or actually, it's not their aim to help Russians to overcome their problems with the past. I'm, of course, talking about the legacy of Soviet Union. That is a totalitarian legacy. There is, of course, good example, as we know from the history, how one other big nation, Germans, overcame this, but they lived in other conditions after the war. And what I see that this problem of understanding that there was a violent act against this state in 1940, that there was a violent ideology that was supported by the majority of Russian society when it emerged in Russia. And there is a problem with recognition of this historical legacy. Actually, I'm not thinking that local Russians must wake up in the morning and tell themselves that, you know, oh yes, I'm a son or a daughter of occupant here, and now I'm going to my workplace, and now I will say to Estonians, well, please forgive me. No, I'm not telling about this thing. I'm telling about empathy, about understanding that this is a small nation with a small language, with hard history, and if it will be possible to kind of arrange this kind of process inside the local Russian community or wider inside the Russian community of the world, it can help a lot. And it depends on the situation in Russia, and it can be fixable. I'm marking that situation in Russia will affect us all the time in a big way.
Thank you.
I would like to support Sergei very much, because I remember it's also documented in one documentary film. When we had this first big movements in Estonia in 88, 89, Popular Front, then I myself, as I am speaking, I hope quite a good Russian from my very early childhood, I went to talk to Russian people, to meetings of Russian people, and it is in film also. I started to talk them about Stalin, and that we have really here common problem, and we have to be together, and so on. And I was really shouted down, whistled out, almost violently, and really that was, for us, was really very astonishing, because for Estonians it was like self-evident that all this Stalinism and all this stored past is something, so we have to say, be free of us soon as possible. But when we tried to have dialogue on this matter, it didn't happen.
Thank you. Would you like to comment on that, Marianna? And also, actually, if you could comment a little bit briefly about
I would like. Does it work?
Can everyone hear Marianna? Just try again.
Is it working?
Yeah, it is.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
So I would like on one side to second what was said, that indeed for Russians, especially those people who identify themselves as Russians living in Estonia, the question of the past and of occupation is of a serious problem. We've done a research at the Tallinn University, and among the Russian speakers who were replying to a question whether Estonia was occupied by Soviet Union or whether it joined voluntarily, approximately 70% in question posed where they had to choose one or the other, chose the voluntary accession. So they prefer to perceive events of the past as if Estonia was not occupied. So then we started to look closer, what is possible motivation? What is the logic, or what's the narrative behind this? And what we have discovered that on one side, about 1/4 of Russian speakers in that particular sample who perceive themselves in bicultural way as Estonian Russians, for them the question of occupation was not really much tied to their self-identification or sense of self. But for those approximately 3/4 or 2/3 who perceive themselves as Russians and for whom their ethnic identity is important, there was very strong and direct link. The more they leaned towards accepting occupation version, the lower was their positive perception as self as Russians. The more they leaned towards voluntary accession, the more positively they perceived themselves as belonging to the Russian group. So it is a question of positive identity. Might be one of the obstacles of what you're speaking about, why and how can people accept these events of the past. And one of possible solutions or suggestions that we as a research group from Tallinn University have proposed is that to differentiate between the questions of a regime, as a Soviet regime, and the effects of the Soviet regime, and the question of ethnic group, as the Russians who were indeed the majority in those society. And in one of discussions at the Opinion Festival a couple of years ago, we also had a similar discussion, and Mart Rask has proposed a very interesting way to differentiate between, for example, Germany and the post-Soviet Union. And he said that what could define if a nation or if an ethnic group must have responsibility for the deeds done by a political regime. And he defined this difference by a question of democratic elections. If the regime came to power through democratic elections, then indeed there is a direct link and responsibility of the ethnic group about what was done. If it did not, I would be interested to hear your opinions on this, whether this differentiation work. In case of Soviet Union, it was a violent coup. So,
I will answer to this. I suppose the expression is Russian Revolution. All the West is using expression Russian Revolution. And if some nation have acquired the state by revolution, it's even more intimate, because then they have really given birth to this nation and country, not only elected.
I would draw sort of a line between one approach that was from your side, looking on the right side of the table, from our side on the left side of the table. I think this idea of Russians accepting the historical values and then integrating to the society is maybe even the right and the idealistic way to approach the question. But life is unfortunately not so idealistic, but rather pragmatic. And I think that we should start not with integrating Russians to the past of Estonia, but we should start with integrating them to the present and to the future. And then history will come along. I started to think of an example of this approach, and actually I couldn't find anything better than talking about my mom and dad, which would be very personal and nice, sort of, and nobody can actually counter-argument that. Because nobody wants to be rude this evening. But I will try. To be honest, I don't think that my parents actually really accept all this concept of violent occupation of a regime that on no account should be considered normal. And from this point of view, me and my parents, we have quite different points of view towards history, politics, and whatnot, especially Ukraine. Yes, very different approaches. But people who made the choice to send me to a class of the language immersion, I'm not sure if Marju told about the one of the language like policies in Estonia of learning Estonian is the language immersion, where children in Russian schools, they start to learn a lot of subjects in Estonian, and then the number of subjects is going a bit lower. And in the end, they both know, they know the Russian and the Estonian language. Well, for me, the language immersion program was sort of a door to the Estonian society. I become to know Estonian language, become to know Estonian culture. I've got some Estonian friends, quite a lot of friends. I think now I can tell that I made a career. I got a university education in the Tartu University. But the reason I did it was because my parents just pragmatically understood that if they want their son to succeed, they have to put him to learn Estonian language. So I think we should start with the question of how can we make Estonia of today and of tomorrow belong to the Russian speakers who live here, who live right now. We don't have to ask them, are you for Putin or against Putin? We don't have to ask them if Estonia was occupied or you think it was a peaceful union or whatnot. I mean, this will come later. Questions we should ask them now is, do you want to live here? Do you want to make this country more prosperous? Do you want to play your role? And when they say yes, we should give them the instruments to do that. We should give them the instruments to play the same game as we play. We, I mean, Estonians or integrated Russians, or I don't know, name it how you want. Integrated Estonians and integrated Russians, because there are also not integrated Estonians. But that's a separate story. So I think we should start with today, with pragmatic things every person can relate with, and then when we are already able to speak one language directly and virtually one language, sit on the same table, then we should start talking. And by the way, you know that issue of Alyosha and 9th of May, not all the people are taking it the same way, but only after we have passed more pragmatic questions.
Thank you. Artemy, this actually brings us to the education and Estonian language teaching. I understand from one of your articles that you said that the teaching of Estonian language is not really
good enough in Estonia. Did I understand correctly? And that it could be better, perhaps?
Yes, well, I think I wrote something about it. Well, I think that, first of all, I'd like to make a tiny comment on what's been spoken about already. Most Russians, they do have this imperialist thing in their heads. And it exists for centuries, and they all feel very proud that they belong to a superpower. And I think that it will take generations, if not centuries, to get rid of it. And you Estonians, you have to live with it. Although I think that the situation is slightly getting better, because the old generation, who I don't even call Russians, I call them Soviets. I mean, all these pensioners, you know, who religiously watch Russian TV.
You're calling Vladimir's parents Soviets? Is that what you're saying?
Could be easily. I mean, you know, why not? It's an objective fact. They used to live in the Soviet Union, and then suddenly they woke up one morning and found themselves in a foreign country. And a lot of them, they still feel like that. And you can do nothing about it. So, yes, this generation will slowly but surely fade for purely physical reasons. Their grandchildren will most probably go west, as suggested in a famous song. They are not going east, if you notice. You know, they don't go to Russia, just like their grandparents, you know, who say that Estonia is shit and Russia is the greatest country of all, with million possibilities. And when you ask them, then why don't you go and take these chances in your beloved Russia? And they just shut up. And they never answer this question. Do sociologists agree with my personal experience? They really never answer this question. Well, anyway, the young Russians will go west. The old Russians will go to heaven. Of course, the middle-age generation is still a question, and I think that that some work should be done with this kind of contingent. And here I can think of several important points. Point number one, in my opinion, is Ida-Virumaa. And I think that there must be a different solution for Ida-Virumaa and, say, Tartu. In Ida-Virumaa, I think 95% of the populations are Russian speakers. And I think it's absolutely absurd when you go there to Narva, to Sillamäe, Kohtla-Järve, and so on, and you don't see any billboards, any road signs, any nothing in Russian language. I mean, this is crazy. And I think that there should be some kind of autonomy. I don't know, maybe not a state autonomy, you know, like with Quebec in Canada. Maybe some kind of cultural autonomy or language autonomy. But you know, you can't live in a country where everyone speaks one language and every kind of governmental, formal, whatever things are in the other language. I mean, you know, it just makes you schizophrenic. So Ida-Virumaa, I have no idea of how to solve this problem, but I think it's quite a special problem. The good thing about Ida-Virumaa, by the way, is that as far as I know from sociological researchers, they know much more and they learn a lot of right things about Russia. Unlike the Russians in Tallinn, who have very strange perception of how life in Russia is now. You know, they see Ivangorod and they know what's really going on, so they have a much more critical approach to the situation in Russia than the Italian Russians. So this is one thing. Another thing, yes, it's what you asked me about, it's the education. First of all, I think that the education must start at kindergarten. When we came here to Tallinn in 2014, we've put our little daughter, who was 5 at that time, no, 4. She was 4 at that time. We've put her in a very expensive private Russian Estonian kindergarten. Okay, 600 euros a month, no problem. But soon we found out that the segregation starts in the kindergarten. And there was an Estonian teacher and a Russian teacher, Estonian kids and Russian kids, and they were all separated from each other. So it didn't help at all. Next year, we've put her in a purely Estonian kindergarten, which belonged to this Catholic or whatever school in Old Town. And then everything was fine, and Lydia started to speak Estonian and made Estonian friends, and we've been very happy. Now, the situation with schools, yes. Now she is in an experimental Estonian-Russian school, which is nearby. And, well, so far we are happy about it. Now, even worse was the case of our son, who was 12 at the time when we came here. And we've put him in a Russian school because, of course, well, he was 12 and he didn't speak a word of Estonian, so he could only go to a Russian school. Soon we found out that it wasn't really a Russian school, it was a Soviet school. It was a Soviet Stalinist, Putinist school. But, well, of course, this was one of the reasons why we left Russia, but still, you know, because we couldn't control how brainwashed our kids are at school. Now, the same thing continued suddenly in Tallinn, and it was not the only reason why we hated it. The other reason was, is that the Estonian language was taught very badly there. You know, there is a Russian word "haltura." Haltura is a work done very badly. So this was the situation with Estonian language there. And, well, of course, we had to put him into another school, and we are more happy. Then point number 3 is Russian language Estonian media, which I found absolutely hopeless. And the point number 4 is the top-level Estonian institutions, starting with the president and the prime minister. I don't see Ms. Kaljulaid and Mr. Ratas, you know, talking any serious things about overcoming this segregation or alienation between the Estonian and the Russian community. And of course, Russians, they do feel neglected if, you know, Estonian big shots are obviously ignoring this whole problem.
Okay, Vladimir, just quick, maybe you can later comment what you think about, you mentioned president, but she just spent a month in Narva. Do you think it was just a gimmick kind of PR move, that there was no substance behind it? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think it's good for a start, but there should be much more.
Okay. Vladimir?
I must admit I had a moment of innuendo when I heard Artemy Troitsky speaking ideas of Yana Tom. About the cultural autonomy. And
just a quick brief, if there is anyone in the audience who doesn't know who is Yana Tom. Yana Tom is...
No, I meant the autonomy.
And she belongs to the Center Party, and she just recently actually proposed that the Estonian Russians should have some sort of cultural autonomy.
Yes. But so if you want to know a little bit more about Russian speakers in Estonia, just Google Yana Tom. No, but actually, really, we are people sitting here we all together, though some of us are even very famous politicians or not so famous politicians, journalists and other famous people, none of us do really understand the way an average Russian speaker think as Yana Tom does. One might say that she uses that only for political capital, but the fact is a fact. What I wanted to say is I think that I don't know what media Artemy is actually watching, because this might sound very political, but I think last years, and not only with the government of the Central Party being a Prime Minister's party, but even before, Estonian state started to look at the Russian-speaking children, not only children, but the Russian speakers' problem. You could start with the question of, I don't know, Prime Minister and even the President speaking, directing the Russian population in Russian language and going to Narva, which is a very emotional case. And you could end up with the fact that those decisions that are politically possible to make in the situation when still the majority in the parliament is with the right-wing parties that say that everything that was done very correctly. No problem with the citizenship. The only problem with the education is the fact that we still have the Russian-speaking schools. So in this situation, when the majority of the parliament is actually sharing the idea that the only problems with Russians is the problem that Russians speak Russian language, in this situation, steps that we have done last years, beginning with the Russian-speaking television, where Artemy had the great chance to work in the beginning, and ending with the mere fact that the possibilities to finish reproducing the non-citizenship status were brought through the parliament. Well, I think that Estonian state is trying, and I think a part of the Estonian speaking society of Estonia is also trying and understanding the problem. Well, this is my feeling as a Russian speaker. But we could also, we could always do more, we should do more, we should do better.
Sergei quickly, and then Marianna, and then we'll take a few slider questions. Yeah.
I'll just do some shooting. Artemy, it is not just to give Russians in some place in Estonia additional rights. So we in Tallinn must study the language, go through the courses, get the citizenship, doing all those tests, then be in the concurrency situation with local Estonians when we are going to have the job in a ministry. And we must do double stuff, because usually people with migrant background must do double stuff. And there in Ida-Virumaa should not do anything, because they are just compactly living Russians. I think this is absolutely unjust. Other thing is that I would like to point out that the Russian school is the basic question. This is the relict of the Soviet Union, because it had here in Estonia two different school systems, Estonian, Russian, in Soviet time. And at the moment, what we need actually, we discussed with Marju Lauristin, we have a plan, that there is a need not only just to give more Estonian language subjects to the Russian schools, but there's also a need to help local Russians to find their culture, that they are members of huge culture, of culture of Pushkin, Dostoevsky, and all others. They have something that is beautiful and big, and Estonians like it also. Estonians like Pushkin, Dostoevsky, and it is a fact for sure. If there would be a cultural identity of local Russians who are truly, deeply understanding their culture, and they are at the same time telling that I'm Russian and I'm speaking Estonian because, well, I would like to participate in this society, Estonians will, I think the vast majority will say, be Russian every day with this kind of attitude. And the third quick remark about that Vladimir said, we should not ask them about Putin. We should ask them about Putin. You know why? Because the Putin is the face of this state ideology that we don't have, that we don't want to have here. We want Russians to keep, I want myself to keep my identity, my culture, my traditions, my understanding of Russian TV and movie shows, but I would like to be, as a citizen, to have the local Estonian and European state identity. And if personality is highly supporting Putin, he is not supporting the basic values of the state, for God's sake.
Sergei, absolutely agree with the second part of your statement. But what about road signs and billboards in Ida-Virumaa?
It doesn't matter.
I mean, when you walk the streets of New York, let alone San Francisco, and you enter Chinatown, there are no English language road signs, no English language billboards. Everything is in Chinese. What's wrong about it?
Artemy, I am sorry, I have to answer you with your own words. You said that we Estonians have to wait until Russians will be freed from their imperial mentality. You said you should wait maybe hundreds of years. But then I say also we Estonians maybe also have this mentality of people being conquered by Peter the Great and then occupied by Stalin. And it also will take hundreds of years to forget about that. And that means that billboards in Russian for us will be the sign of occupation.
Okay, Marianna, you've been waiting for a long time.
Well, I just cannot leave unnoticed the concern or remarks by Artemy saying that the state is not doing enough. If you take consecutive integration monitoring reports that's been done in Estonia ever since 2001, and you look at the changes that's been taking place in the society, in all terms that the integration monitoring is looking at, you see a huge change and progress. And also, not only in technical matters and statistics, but also in terms of philosophically understanding and what is integration. A major shift, there's been talk about changes during past 5 to 10 years. A major shift has been understanding that integration is not a question of Russians doing something and becoming Estonians. But the major shift has been that integration is a question of both Estonians and Russians coming together and finding this correct balance that allows us to not just coexist, but to efficiently function together as a state. If you look at the most recent monitoring, one of the most problematic parts at this time is the situation at labor market. On one side, segregatedness of labor market, existence of predominantly Russian-speaking, predominantly Estonian-speaking companies, and also certain inequalities at labor market, which are linked primarily to language and to contact and social networks between the cultural groups. So this brings back, as the conclusion done by the Human Development Report, back to the school system and reproduction of segregation between Estonians and Russians. Or actually, when I was thinking about today's debate, I was thinking we should not speak about Estonians and Russians. We should speak about the multicultural inhabitants of Estonia, because we should not forget that there are hundreds of other nationalities who might be all speaking also Russians as one of the big languages, but they have their separate identity and they're proud of them being Ukrainians, Georgians, etc. One moment. One more question that I wanted to... Silver, when starting, asked me to speak about open Estonian identity or Estonian open identity. It is a concept of state identity that is not linked to any ethnic group, but that is, as an umbrella identity, equally acceptable to representatives of all ethnic groups, to give them the basis of belonging to the society. And one of the research projects that was done with Tartu University actually looked at what could be the basis for this concept of Estonian open identity. And among other things, there was, for example, appreciation of Estonian nature and the richness of Estonian land. It was pride for achievement of people from Estonian origin. It was seeing Estonia as a small but successful country. It was accepting different interpretation of Estonian history. It was, among other things, like statistically. So the question is, I completely agree with what Vladimir has said, that we have to focus with integration based on what is taking place now and based on the future. And we have to be very careful not to let the past interfere with our building of this way forward and of finding our local common language, and as Sergei has also mentioned, of building the positive role and positive identity of those minority groups that exist in Estonia, and the largest of them being the Russians, or people with ethnic Russian origin as largest minority group in here.
May I make one remark? When I look back, what was our idea when we started integration program in '97? The basic really was a liberal idea. It was really a program of civic integration, not about ethnic integration, because I don't think that any Estonian want to like that all Russians will dance Estonian folk dances and then sing only Estonian songs and not like Dostoevsky and Tchaikovsky. I suppose no. It was the idea of civic integration, of social integration as members of one society, not about some kind of symbiosis of different ethnicities into something like person of Soviet Union, which was said it's a new nationality. We didn't want to have something like that.
Okay, Marianna, briefly, and then we're going to take public questions.
About possibility of ethnic integration, just recently I discovered that actually Samuel Huntington, with the Clash of Civilization, he has mentioned Estonia. And he has mentioned it in a context that in the former Soviet Union, anything could happen. A communist could become a Democrat, a poor can become rich, but a Russian will never become an Estonian. So we are famous in this way, so the only way for integration is civic integration. With this, I agree 100%.
Excellent. We're going to take Erika. We got some questions from public, I understand.
There are very many interesting questions from Slido. Some of them have been answered already, I hope. For example, how long does it take for the non-Russian, non-Estonian speakers to die out? I think we discussed this one. And there was a question to Marianna also directly about what exactly constitutes an Estonian identity and what values does it require. I will take some of the, you can also upvote the questions that are more interesting. For example, one of the most popular questions has been at the moment, perhaps some Russian-speaking Estonians, now I lost it. Perhaps some Russian-speaking Estonians don't wish to put much effort into learning Estonian, is also caused by the effort usability ratio, so meaning it's not very useful globally to learn Estonian.
How would you comment on that?
I would say that there is another issue also. I remember my school years, and usually some teachers said to us, it was straightforward actually, that, well, there's no, you don't have an idea that it's a waste of time, it's wasting time, because you will not become somebody in Estonia because of your nationality. So there's an interesting feeling of being discriminated before the discrimination actually took place. It could not take place at all, but the feeling will be there, and the language courses will be seen through this prism, and this is an interesting psychological phenomenon.
I also had a very interesting experience a few years ago. Was speaking to a very bright 15-year-old girl who had wonderful ideas, but she couldn't speak Estonian. And I asked her, why don't you learn Estonian language? And she said, well, anyway, I graduate from school and I'm going to move and continue my education somewhere, like in Germany or somewhere. And I asked her, yes, but until you graduate, you're here. And without the language, you cannot really participate in a lot of things. You miss out on a lot of opportunities. So it won't take a piece away of you to speak the language. And then after you graduate, you can do whatever. By now, she has graduated. She has learned the language. I cannot say, I won't take responsibility for making her to do that. But she has learned the language. She's building her career here. And she's really bright. So I think sometimes it's this kind of stereotypes that stop people from putting this effort and taking advantage of those opportunities that they do have here, while somewhere else, being a stranger, starting from scratch, often you won't reach so many, you won't reach those heights that you can reach here.
I think, again, if we think pragmatically, from the point of the state and from the point of the, from normal people, if you want like that, it is our interest that Russian speakers and all the other non-Estonian speakers start learn Estonian. Also because there are not a lot more than 1 million people speaking Estonian language in the world. So taking that into consideration, I think we should start with motivating people learn Estonian. One thing which was done, I think, in a wrong way from the beginning of 90s was the question that if you people want to live here, you have to know the language. And then maybe you will become happy. But we should start with the other proposition. We should tell people, we want you to be happy together with us. And if you want to be happy, you can learn Estonian. You can also not learn Estonian and try to be happy. But believe me, it will be much more difficult. So I think if about 30 years ago, we would have chosen another approach, by now, maybe we would have more or less the same number of Russian people speaking Estonian language. But the attitude towards language studies, the attitude towards the question, why do I know Estonian language? Why do I have to learn it? It would be totally different. And it would be a much more effective, much more positive, and much more, I would say even maybe peaceful and pragmatic way of going further. I would end up with, again, my own personal example, because when I was in the 5th grade, and my dad told me that, you know, Vova, because Vladimir is not Vlad, but Vova, from the 1st September you are going to this Estonian class. This was, I mean, it was a tragedy for me. It was like it was so shocking, and I felt that something very unjust and very wrong is happening to me, because now I will have to speak the language I don't really know. So it's not the question about did I learn Estonian language or not. I did. It's the question about the attitude. We could have achieved, I think, the same or more or less the same results with less stress, with less anger, and we would find ourselves now in a much more positive situation from the point of the state.
Sure, but I don't want to be stuck in the past too much, so let's try to focus on the current. And just quickly, any more questions?
Very many, very interesting.
May I just add to the Estonian question issue? I think that learning Estonian is really cool. It's a nice language. Not too simple, but still. But maybe it's too cool because I just like to illustrate it with one little fact. A private lesson of Estonian, 1 hour with a private tutor, costs 30 euros. Just to compare, 1 hour of Chinese with a Chinese tutor costs 5 euros.
And this is why Estonian state is opening Estonian language houses in Tallinn and Tartu, and I'm the lucky one whose girlfriend is leading one of them.
And one more thing, if you think that there is no demand or if people don't want to learn Estonian language, last year I was working at the Integration Foundation that is opening Estonian language houses, but which also provides free courses for local Russian speakers living in Estonia, free Estonian language courses. When the registration for courses was opening for approximately 500 spots for people, it was web registration. How do you think how fast did they run out of the places? 15 minutes, and the website crashed. And next time they ordered extra space to be able to process more, it crashed again. It didn't last longer. So there is a huge demand. But now the question is, what other obstacles are there for people to actually mastering the language?
I would say that we again are focusing too much on language. And that has been one of the problems with this integration, as I said, too much focusing on language, not on communication. Communication between people, communication between cultures, on understanding of each other. And understanding includes also understanding why people feel differently about history. It's also part of understanding. Why people feel different about Putin, it's also part of understanding. And I would say that from Estonian viewpoint, Estonian person will integrate much more quickly with person who is not liking Putin but not speaking language. It is much more fundamental, common feeling. And if person is speaking fluent Estonian but liking Putin like Yana Toom, then it's impossible to integrate with Yana Toom.
Okay, I will read the most popular question at the moment. It's exactly, of course, what we have written down as well. We have prepared very many questions for tonight, but we don't have time for them all. So very similar to what we already wrote down in the team. Since integration is a two-way street, then what is being done or could be done to influence the native Estonian side to help move the integration process forward? So from our team as well, we wrote down all the questions about integration, what can be done better. It's a huge question, of course, but let's try to tackle it.
One of the things that has to be, and which is very important to influence, is Estonian media. Is the Estonian media, and to make it understand that it's not writing only for Estonians, but the Russian speakers who speak Estonian fluently or well enough are also part of the audience. And the discourse, the arguments, the words, they have to be considerate enough to understand that their audience is not homogeneous. One of the results of integration monitoring 2011 was that there was more experience of discrimination through media by people than through direct intercultural contact. So people were felt discriminated through media to much bigger extent than they experienced it from their personal life.
I would also add how to help Estonians to kind of also drive the car in the right direction. I think success stories. Success stories are so strong. I think 15 years ago, Estonians were just asking themselves, where are those Russians who are working in the public sector and business, and why they are not writing opinion articles and not participating in business forums, and where they are. They're like 1, 2, 3 personalities, individuals who were talking from the perspective of Estonian, of a Russian with Estonian state identity. Now this situation absolutely changed. This elevator, social elevator, is working, and there are a lot of really important people for Estonian culture, for Estonian business, for Estonian law system in courts who are ethnically Russians and who are ready, now they are ready to speak about their stories. And this is enormous energy and enormous feelings what Estonians get from there.
Just quickly interrupt, obviously 3 of those success stories are here in the panel, but do you feel that those success stories are highlighted enough by the local Estonian media? I mean, obviously you've been, quite prominently been representing the media, but it's partly because you were, involved in the politics and stuff, but other than that, do you feel that?
That's more because of my mission, actually, not because I'm involved in the politics. But yes, Estonian media is ready to promote, but the other question is, there is still one problem. If you go out and say something, being a Russian, ethnically Russian professional, saying something about Russian minority, those issues that we are discussing, you can actually get hit by the community. So there is a danger, but it's getting lower and lower, I hope.
I would say the main problem with the Estonian side of integration is that we think of integration as some kind of a special niche project that has a very certain beginning, then funding, 50 million euros, the project manager and the board, and it will end in 10 years, and then we can, open champagne and say, yeah, hey, integration achieved. What's next? Space? If we want this integration to really happen, as Marju describes it, in the way of communication, in the way where people start to communicate with each other and communities start communicate with each other, we should also, I'm sorry, but put to work the whole society with this idea. Today, we have the Ministry of Culture. There is the Department of Cultural Diversity, where Marianna was working, no? Under them. And and there is the Integration Foundation and the Language House, and there's my girlfriend working there. So, but the problem is that there are 5 people there. And you could say that there are 5 people and one boss responsible sort of for integration in Estonia. And at the same time, we have a ministry, I think it was either the Ministry of the Rural Ministry or the Ministry of the Rural Life, that said that, we shall not send out our press releases in Russian language because we don't want, somebody oppose us on this topic. I mean, really, they refuse to send out press releases in Russian language. What I want to say is that if you want to, sorry? Maaelu Ministerium. If there are people left in the rural life as well. But the idea is that you cannot make integration some kind of a project where you have 5 people responsible. If you want this thing work as a society, the society has to work, or at least a big part of the society has to work and has to accept at least they have to accept that that some effort should be done. And the problem is that we tend to think that we will find, we will find these successful Russians, you guys with your brilliant Russian accents. We'll take a few Russian immigrants and we'll say, look at these guys, look at us. We are cool, you can also be cool too. But the problem is that we are all exclusions. We are not a rule. Today, only 2 to 4% of the Estonian public sector workers of ministries are people who could be named Russian speakers. I mean, we've even done some kind of promotional project to become role models and promote all this stuff. Of course, it has some kind of positive effect. But if we want to actually really change the situation, we must start talking not about role models, but about average citizens.
One sentence. There's a party of Prime Minister of Estonia that actually is the party of Prime Minister because they have Russian votes. So this is the biggest success story.
Of course. You know for whom to vote.
Or if you speak about statistics of ministries in police and border guard, there's approximately 15% of Russian speakers, and the ratings of trust towards police and border guard as government institutions are considerably higher.
But not the police and border guards are writing our laws, our bylaws, and controlling how they are fulfilled.
Let's leave this at the moment. We're not going to have time. But actually, Artemy, I've got a question for you concerning the media. You have also criticized Estonian and Russian television, ETV Plus, ETV Plus. So it's a Russian television run by Estonian Public Broadcasting, and as I understand, only 3% of Estonian Russian community watches that television. And you have said something about that as well. What would you change? I mean, what do you think?
What to do with this?
What do you think we should do it without, and also how should Estonian Public Broadcasting address that community? What should they change?
First, I'd like to make a little comment on what was said before. It's a popular argument of Russian activists here that there's very few Russian speakers in the Estonian government, public sector, and so on. Well, I think there's no ground for this argument, because in my honest opinion, normal people don't go to work in the government. This is the case with Russia, where if you work in the government, if you're a member of parliament and so on, it opens you the way to unlimited bribery and all kinds of things, and you very soon become very rich. Since Estonia is a rather transparent and democratic country, I think there's absolutely no reason for people who want to do creative work, travel, enjoy life, and so on, to work in the public sector. Regarding ETV Plus, well, I think it's a typical case of haltura, of work done very formally. I think it was a very good step from the Estonian government to start a Russian language TV channel, and the long-awaited step indeed. But the way it was done, it was very unprofessional, very boring, and conceptually totally wrong. They wanted to imitate a Russian entertainment channel with 1/1000th of a budget of a Russian entertainment channel. You know, like I wrote in one article, it was the same thing as if you want, a restaurant singer from Narva to compete with Alla Pugacheva or Philipp Kirkorov, the biggest Russian pop stars. It doesn't make any sense. And they've done this instead of doing an honest, sharp channel that would also touch upon Russian matters and criticize Putin and so on, and work against the Russian TV propaganda. And they said, no, we will not do this, because then we will alienate our Russian audience. I think it was a wrong concept. It was a very kind of cowardly and unprofessional concept.
I would just very briefly, I would second the idea that the ETV Plus should have been a sharp channel, but their role is not to criticize Putin. I understand you want to make a revolution in Russia through Estonia.
That's true.
But the function of ETV Plus is to criticize Kaljulaid, Ratas, and our politicians. I mean, before criticizing Russian politicians, we have our own politicians. So. Of course, we are all working for Putin, we and the Social Democrats. But but they should at least start working with our local agenda before going to the global scale.
Just if someone does not understand why is everybody so concerned about people voting for Putin or people whether the Russian-speaking channel criticizes Putin or not. The Russian-speaking channels made in Russia and often most targeted on Russian audience and the Russian federations are quite popular here among the Russian speakers in Estonia, and they're considerably highly trusted. This is also data from integration monitoring. Well, 70 something. 90%.
Right, 90% apparently of the Estonian Russian community watches Russian television.
But the trust ratings are lower. They're approximately around 70%, but still they're higher, for example, compared to Estonian national television or Estonian speaking television channels. So
the majority of the Estonian Russian community really follows media follows Russian cultural sphere.
So a big part. Mostly those people are older generation people. So younger people are more diverse in their media use.
Well, I have an example to oppose this idea. If it would work like this, 90% of the Russian speakers wouldn't vote for the central party, whose leadership very actively for the last 2 years is supporting European Union, NATO, and increasing the costs of the national defense.
Vladimir, your party is buying time in PBK. This is the first channel that is Russian here. And in those shows, TV shows, programs, there is nothing about this kind of stuff. Like
PBK is a channel that is watched by the 5% of the population, but
okay. Yeah, you will.
Yeah. Excuse me. As we have done a lot of research on the media audience, including followers of the Russian TV channels from Moscow and elsewhere, then it's obvious that if 90% of Russian population are following Moscow television, it doesn't mean that all 90% are very happy about the content. And those who are more, say, more integrated, then they are also more experienced of following a lot of different channels. They are very actively following, for example, the Western channels. When I was talking outside of Estonia, how many of the Russians in Estonia are following Euronews, then my friends in Brussels, they were really astonished. They, we didn't imagine that somebody is following Euronews. And now we know there are Russians in Estonia. So in this sense, the picture is not so simple. It means that among this Russian-speaking population, there are quite, I said, about 20% of people who are really pro-Estonian, and even more, they are very much not only pro-European, they are really cosmopolitan. And they are following global media, and among global media, also Russian media, but they are quite critical. Okay. But it's 20%. But 70%, they are not critical.
That's high. Okay,
Okay, very quickly, two very quick comments on this topic as well. Not really questions, but first of all, as long as voting, so this is a comment to this topic, as long as voting for Putin and diversion in political views is considered a lack of integration, the real integration will always fail. It's a shame. That's just a comment. Another suggestion about the ETV Plus would be just to use the budget of ETV Plus instead. To get to put for all the other channels the subtitles into Russian and English. So very similar to what we have in the Estonian movies. If the movie is in English, then the subtitles are in Estonian Russian or vice versa. And then one other very important question that we, again with the team, wrote down as well already. How do you feel about opening up the possibility of dual citizenship to help integration of both the Russian minority and other immigrants. So just I will comment very quickly and then you can continue. Estonian government actually just downvoted the suggestion for the bill of dual citizenship. So it was proposed.
The government coalition, it was proposed by the opposition Reform Party, and all the other parties in the parliament basically were against it. So yes, but you can comment on that briefly afterwards. But just yeah.
So that was the question. So I know we tackled it as well. So.
And I think right at the back there was also a question, or someone wanted to comment on Artemy's.
Is it working?
Reply. Yeah.
Hi. I have two questions. The first one is, how many of the Russian speakers tend to speak a second language in this country? Because the impression as a foreigner and an English speaker, mainly an English speaker in this country, is that I can communicate with the Estonian community but cannot communicate with the Russian community as well, because probably this community has dug itself into some sort of isolation. And the issue of the subtitles on TV, if I open Estonian TV and I want to watch a movie, I will learn some words from the subtitles in Estonian, but I can watch the movie. If I want to see the same movie on Russian TV, most likely it's going to be dubbed in Russian and it will be incomprehensible. I think one of the biggest reforms would be to have the English movie with subtitles in Russians, because the moment that the Russians will have to learn English and become multilingual, learning Estonian will become part of a mental exercise, which is now completely deprived. They're completely deprived of. I mean, there is a society which is cutting itself off the being European and integrated internationally, which is belonging to the Estonian being. These people don't belong to that. That's what the problem is, in my opinion.
So can I just clarify? Are you suggesting that the Russian community in Estonia, that they are not international?
My impression is that they speak much less foreign languages than the Estonians do, particularly English. If I go in a supermarket and I try to pay the cashier and a Russian speaker is working there, I have to communicate with gestures or use Google Translate and put words in English and translate them in French.
Well, I think I could perhaps comment on Russian speakers not speaking other languages. I think it's a question of generations. So if you're speaking about those people whose most education and big part of active life went through in Soviet Union, where indeed it was a closed country and it was extremely complicated for a person to obtain fluency in a foreign language, then people of our generation, as a rule, speak three languages: Estonian, Russian, and English, and some others as well. And we are now speaking 30-something to 40 people, like years of age people. So I don't know about your experience, and it must also be related to education of people, level of education. So people who are in academia or science, you cannot do it without speaking a foreign language fluently. So.
The Russian Estonian society? Do academia and the cream of the society represent the society? I think.
Well, so academia does not represent the whole of Russian-speaking population, but I am surprised that at your experience, if you're referring to people of older generation, I would not be surprised. If you're referring to people of younger generation, Russian-speaking, not Russian speakers, not speaking other languages.
Right, but let's move on. There's someone at the back. You want to ask or you want to comment?
Exactly.
Okay, but Nela will get the microphone there. Just while we get this one, Artemy, one thing I wanted to ask you about. You said about the school your kids went to. You said it's like a Soviet school. What did you actually mean briefly? I mean, did you mean like what, in terms of what? In terms of the teaching, in terms of the teacher's background? What exactly?
Mentality and environment.
Or the mentality in general?
Well, I can only rely on the stories told by my son, but you know, like one very flamboyant example of this is that they've been writing, I don't know the English word for it, сочинение. Essay, yeah, exactly. An essay about who's my favorite man or favorite politician and so on, and nearly the whole class wrote about Putin as if he was the president of Estonia.
Thank you. Okay, we come back to that question. Just take now at the back. Yeah?
Hello. My name is Tamer, I'm from Turkey. Talking about communication and looking at this photo of the event, it reminds me a Turkish saying, without touching tongues to each other, you cannot learn a language. So how is the, I haven't been living here for a long time, so I don't know how likely to mingle with each other for these two societies. How is the dating and marriage atmosphere? Because we go to one club, everyone is Russian. We go to another club, everyone is Estonian. All Estonians are on Tinder, all Russians are on Badoo. So how likely to mingle with each other?
Excellent, excellent. This is a very good question. It was one of the questions we wanted to ask. Is actually really how we can improve the sort of interaction between Estonian and Russian communities. A few years back, again, it may sound very unpopular if I mention that, but a Centre Party deputy mayor at the time, Mr. Kõlvart, actually proposed an idea to have at least one Russian language song at the Estonian Song Festival. And of course, Estonian media went sort of ballistic, you know, huge hysteria about this idea. But do you, any of you can comment on that? Do you think it's a good idea? Or, okay, if we leave the Song Festival out, maybe another huge alternative cultural event that, you know, both Estonians and Russians will attend?
I know some nice nightclubs. Yeah, I can share. But being actually serious, we see this problem not only in the evening, but also during the day. For example, in our universities, where, well, at least it was in Tartu University, when you had on some kind of a course a few Russian speakers, they would group up, they would hang together, and they will form sort of a smaller separate group. It would take them some times, maybe some years, to start really interacting with the whole group, with the bigger group. And I think with the informal way of interacting and building, you know, bridges, it's almost the same thing. The question is that you have to break the barrier at least once, so that people can see that, wow, actually the moves are the same in the dance. No, but literally. So I don't know if it's the question of the song festival. I think it's not. I think it would be better if not people like politicians from the central party would say that this could be in a Russian language, and this could be in a Russian language, and this could be in Russian language. But it's, I think, this is the thing that the Estonian car on this road should do, is to say, what can we make more chewable, if you understand what I mean? What can we make more understandable for the Russian speakers, what we consider very important for us?
I will say we have made research on Song Festival, and we asked the people. And I think the Song Festival really, all people want that it will not be political event. It is really organized by choirs, by musicians, choir directors, and so on. And if they will feel that it is okay, then there will be song in Russian, song in Chinese, or whatever. Until they don't feel it, that it will be okay. That will be no song in
Totally
Russian.
agree. Yeah.
And I suppose that it is matter of change also. But up to now, I suppose it's very good that there is more and more choirs from Russian schools who enjoy to be involved and participate and sing those songs together with Estonians. We have now American choirs and choirs from other countries, so it is the vice versa process, which is really a very good one. But what about this grouping? Then I will say that is the biggest challenge of this integration in school. Because what we are discussing now among teachers, even if there will be kids in class from Estonian and Russian families, then how really to achieve that they will freely work in teams, mixed teams. And it will need not kind of self-organization, but at first it will need very clear effort from teacher's side, from organization side, how to compose the teams. And after a while, it will become normal. But in the beginning, this barrier should be drawn down by teachers.
I totally second that.
And back to the question about intermarriages. Intermarriages do happen. More often it's Russian women and Estonian men than vice versa. Probably because of the gender roles and cultural differences in the gender roles. So Estonian women are less likely to accommodate all the demands of the Russian men. Yeah. But about the Estonian song festivals, our research at Tallinn University touched this as well, and what we discovered is that for Estonians and for the Russian speakers here, this event has a quite different meaning. For Estonians, it's quite important cornerstone of Estonian identity, and also it is an important symbol of obtaining Estonian statehood. So a lot of those political rallies that Marju was speaking about earlier today were happening also at the singing festival grounds. And there were important events for people to retain their Estonian identity through the Soviet times. There's a lot of symbolism that is related for Estonians to the Song and Dance Festival. For the Russian speakers living here, it is a state-level, huge event that is uniting people. And so for them to be included in and represented at this event is a symbolic meaning of being included in the state. And that's why there is quite a big contrast. Estonians currently are quite protective towards...
No, they're very open if Russians will be there, including...
But not for the songs.
No, singing.
Yeah, singing yes, but the songs. But in our research we have asked, or we were looking for a middle ground. And this middle ground that was quite strongly enough supported by Estonians and quite strongly supported by Russians would be to have a multicultural song and dance festival that would contain important aspects of Song and Dance Festival, including its depth of being not just event of couple of days, but involving big masses of people and being prepared during 5 years.
Not just Estonians,
yeah.
Russian, but also other nationalities. Like
yeah. So multicultural, not just Estonian and Russian. It's not the question of two ethnic groups.
Multicultural event.
A different event.
Yeah. Okay.
So the question was not to touch the Estonian Song and Dance Festival, but to add something that would be inclusive.
We did, quickly take an audience question.
Thank you. My name is Irina, and I'm originally from Russia, and I live here 20 years. And I have maybe a very stupid question, but maybe we should start from it. When I moved here, everything I could feel in Estonia, this atmosphere of revenge. I wouldn't say that I feel it very sharply now, but still. And my question is, do Estonians really want we would integrate? And if they want, why?
Do Estonians really want what?
Russians would integrate. Right, would be integrate, yes. Do you Estonians really want it? Okay. And if you want, why?
I think this is actually a process. In the beginning of the new period of independence, Marju, you also mentioned it, a lot of people were thinking that they just must go to their historical country, and that's all. But it is a process, historical home, and this is changing actually a lot. And I think one of the most important moments was this 2007, the removal of the statue of the bronze soldier, when people understood that actually the society might be absolutely destabilized because the idea of having free state here, the idea of Estonian Republic, could not have any friends in the Russian community. So I think in 20 years we will be not asking this question at all, because the stronger the society in the country and its institution get, the less is the fear of Estonians for the survival of their state, because this is the existential fear will remain because of the political situation in the world and because of the sizes. It's quite normal.
I would answer that as among Russians, there are people who are feeling differently and thinking differently about integration. Starting from those, I mentioned 20% who already are integrated and don't feel themselves anymore to be needing integration. They already are inside the society, they don't feel difference. And then the other side who really feel that they still live in Moscow or somewhere. Among Estonians also, there is also among maybe I would say third, who are really interested in the integration is the most, say, open cultural way, meaning to really being together, communicate, share with each other, be part of one society. And then there is the other side or other part who are interested, like you said, for some kind of pragmatic or political reason, for security or for anything that we must. And then there is the one side who is, say, 20-25%, who now are with this EKRE party and so on, who say that no integration, it's always the fight forever and so on. So Estonian society is not, in this sense, unanimous. But when we look at the mainstream, that it was said already, mainstream have shifted. Mainstream has very strongly shifted in last, say, 5-7 years, so that the voice and the vision of those who really substantially are interested in real integration, not just for some practical or some, but in real integration, it's growing and it's becoming more and more widespread among young people especially, but also among the other more educated people. The people want just to live in say, open, democratic, normal society.
Artemy, you want to comment quickly?
Well, I actually wanted to say that, in my opinion, the key word here is quality. All people, both Estonian and Russian, they want good quality, interesting life. And there are some circumstances under which they get it. And then I see both Russians and Estonians having fun together at one place. Like, there are sometimes good rock concerts at Rock Cafe, like Gogol Bordello played there in May or June. I was there, and I must admit that there were 50% Russians, some of whom came from St. Petersburg, especially to see the band, and half of them were Estonians. And the same applies for, good restaurants, good parties, good universities, good movies, and so on. And I think that if there will be more good quality life, entertainment, and and generally speaking, more fun in our coexistence, then the integration process will go very naturally. And of course, it is based on communication, not only on language. After all, yes, English is also a nice solution to these problems, especially for those Russians who came here only recently.
Just a quick remark, Artemy, before you said that young Estonian Russians are leaving. Actually, there are also young people from Russia coming to here now among the startup community. I've met quite a few Russians who have actually come. So we are receiving new people from Russia, in fact. But there was another question from the public here. Was it?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Tommaso. And first of all, I want to thank you for having this tonight, because I work part-time as a tour guide in Tallinn. I've been working for 2 years during the summers. And this is one of the most common questions that I get asked from foreigners who are coming to Estonia. And as a foreigner myself, I'm from Venezuela. It's really interesting. So I have 3 things. I'll try to be brief, short, and concise. My first one is for Marju, my first question. And the question is about a politician, political scientist, and I believe he was a teacher at Tartu University, Taagepera. And he makes a claim that historically, since the time of Peter the Great, since that Russification period, like the Russification that began with Peter the Great, is responsible for the then consolidation of the Estonian identity. So if it wasn't for Peter the Great, then the Estonian identity would not have flourished. That's his claim, which I don't understand, and that's why I'm raising the question. That's what, and it's been on my mind, and I've asked other Estonians, and they haven't been able to answer that question, why he made that claim. So I find that interesting, also coming from someone who's Estonian, I believe. So that's my first question. Was that?
Just before you move on, can I just clarify? Are you saying the information you have is that since Estonia was opened by the Russian Empire in
Yes.
1710, I think it was, by Peter the Great, that there was a Russification?
Correct. So the claim. So I read that. So the claim that I'm reading from a book is that Taagepera claims that if it wasn't for Peter the Great coming and taking over the Swedish Empire, then there would be no Estonian identity. And I find that really interesting, given that the Estonian nation is among one of the longest and smallest nations. Correct. Whether that claim is true and why.
Let me say.
And why?
If we want to look back at the Estonian identity formation, then mostly through history, it wasn't formed on this scale of Estonian Russian. It was formed on scale of Estonian German, because that was an issue. Because here were German landlords, and Estonians were really oppressed and discriminated as a so-called countryside people, farmers, and so on. And the so-called first awakening or national movement, it was on this ground. Nothing to do with Russians at all. Russian issue was really, yes, brought in by Russification. Russification, which started in 1882, and it was really connected with very harsh Russian policies, removing German language. At first, removing German language from schools, from university, and bringing in compulsory Russian language education, up to the situation where Estonian kids had to learn in Estonian primary schools in Russian, and also talking among themselves in Russian. And that was this very harsh Russification, which really brought in this the visibility of Russian issue, because in Tsarist time before that, the German landlords, who were also in very high positions in the Russian Tsar court, they kept this called specific Baltic order, and they could rule without intervention from Petersburg. In this sense, I suppose this Russian issue became Russian issue again very strongly only after Sovietization, because then it was major dominating scale. Up to that, it mostly was connected with Estonian German issue.
Thank you. Thank you.
German was actually the official language here to Amtssprache in German that you could use for all legal matters until 1879. So everything to do with Russian, like Marju said, actually came way later.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, and sorry, you had to quickly.
Yeah. So quickly. The second thing that I want to raise very quickly is the following. So, you mentioned, Vladimir, if I am correct, to say that the past is not important anymore and that we have to look at the present and the future. And I, coming from Venezuela, I want to implore Estonian society in general that it's important to raise questions of the past, to remember, because the same ideology that brought the occupation of this country in the past is still alive today, and I've lived that, and it's bringing to the deaths, and a lot of people are suffering because of that. So in some sense, it is relevant. It is important, and I think there's still a lot to be learned from that.
Okay, so I would just correct you that I haven't said that the past is not important. I have said that in the process of integration, you have to first take present and future and then bring the past in. But I agree to what you have said, that you have to know the past, you have to analyze it, not to make the same stupid mistakes society has made beforehand.
Sure, I think you can do it at the same time.
But
lastly, just
may I add here, if we can have some kind of dream, how to have most positive environment for integration, then from Estonian side, the very, very important factor could be if, for example, somebody next head of Russian state will really recognize the whole horror of Soviet system and Soviet time, and recognize also that there was Soviet, not Russian, Soviet occupation, and really would make the same steps which have been done by German, but also by even Americans concerning the slavery and so on. Recognize those historical say things, and then go ahead and look in the future.
It would be nice if that would really happen in Russia, but I think actually the ground for that is very solid, because when we speak about the horrors and the victims of the Soviet time in this Estonian context, we usually forget that actually a very big share of the Russian speakers, even of those who live here in Estonia, have also suffered from the Stalinist
I will tell you, we had the question in our questionnaire. In your family, have some of your members of the family or your relatives suffered for Stalinist repressions? Then, yes, you're right. There was 63% of Estonians said yes, and 24% of Russians living here. Meaning that there are Russians living here having these memories as Estonians, but among Estonians there are 2 or 3 times more. But what is the problem? That among Russian community here, these people also don't have this situation where among the Russian speakers they can freely really discuss these things.
Okay, but quickly, Marianna, and then we're going to move on to the last question. We have time flies, unfortunately, and we just cannot touch them all. So
I think a suggestion for this discussion was that how realistic, considering the changes that are now taking place in Russian Federation, is to wait until we hear from their official acceptance of the deeds done in the past. If we see that right now there's more tendency to speak less of the crimes committed by the Soviet regime that were committed in the Russian Federation, etc. But perhaps we should draw a line between the local Russian-speaking community here and the Russian Federation and and or the inhabitants of Russian Federation, and focus on actually building this stronger link specifically with the Russian speakers living in here, being part of our community, and not link them through history discourse to the mass that was. It is us who have to draw this line, Estonians or Estonian people.
Seems like we're going to have volume 2 because we just don't have enough time. But just one last question to everyone. Just looking to the future. First, about the education system. We are debating in the society, should we have the unified system where Estonians, Russians all learn together? And second, just you already mentioned dream. If you dream, let's say Estonia in maybe 5 years is too short time, but let's say 10 years time, in terms of relations between those two communities, where do you see Estonia? Who wants to start?
From the
Okay, let me start. So I've lived here for 4 years. Most of my friends are Estonians, both men and women. And I must tell you that despite what Vladimir and Marianna told here, I don't notice much changes in the integration process. I mean, the only change I have noticed is that in 2014, a lot of Estonians have been really panicking about possible invasion of Russia after Crimea and Ukraine, of course. Right now, I don't feel this mood among the Estonians. They've calmed down, and I'm very happy. Other than that, I think the situation is the same. Well, I don't know whether this means that the government doesn't take any measures to improve it, or because they are taking wrong measures. I don't know, but I don't see much change here. And well, of course, the representatives of parties and state institutions will say, no, we are doing this and that, and we are so positive and progressive, and we are taking steps to improve the situation. Well, of course, they have to say that. I as a simple and I think rather objective witness see no progress.
Okay. Quite pessimistic, but okay, fine. Vladimir?
Well, we've done a bad job. I hope I hope we have time to sort of to prove. But speaking seriously, I think what we need in integration is we need less politics. We need a compromise between people who usually cannot reach a compromise. And we need a compromise that would be made not only by the leaders of the society, but a compromise, an average person who doesn't have any interest in government politics and stuff like that, would agree and say, yes, I think this is right, and I support it even if it has nothing to do with me. And I think we must also admit one thing. If we admit that Estonians as a nation can be afraid because they're small, if we admit that there are some emotional and historical reasons why the attitudes towards the problem of integration is not always very rational, we should also agree that the parents of the Russian-speaking children can also be afraid. A Russian-speaking grandma whose death is awaited by Artemy Troitsky as a joke, she has also the right to be afraid. And a scholar who is going to Narva and who has no chance to practice Estonian language has also the right to be afraid about his future in this country. And I think in the end, it is the aim of the state to explain those people why you don't have to be afraid. And it is the state who has to sort of be the first one to draw the hand and to show that you don't have the reason to be afraid. And we actually all want to live happily ever after. At least the majority.
Sorry, I just have to say that I'm not anticipating the death of grandmothers and grandfathers of Soviet origin. When I said that the hope is that they will die out, you know, this is what's happening when you do nothing. If you do nothing, if you don't undertake any measures to solve this problem, then you can only can hope. And I think that this is the position of many people in the Estonian top-level establishment. Then they only hope that, you know, the problem will disappear itself. And how can it disappear? You know, only in the physical way.
Marianna.
So I will respond to your question regarding the education system, as I understand you wanted this to be touched. So I do believe that common education system, not segregated education system, is the way forward, with a few conditions that has to be very important for this. One of them is to address the fears that Vladimir has mentioned, the fears of the Russian-speaking parents or children about losing their ethnic identity in the process of multicultural education. So it has to be addressed both through public communication to explain why that fear is not grounded, and through methodology to actually guarantee that while taking benefits from this united education system through language learning, through contact, through cultural immersion, etc., you also retain contact, strong contact with your ethnic roots, and you don't lose out on this aspect. So that was first point. The dream would be to have strong, common, inclusive, if you would say, Estonianness, or open state identity that would be acceptable for everyone, and also to have a clear and positive spot for minorities in the Estonian context, for the Russian-speaking minorities, through positive examples or through discussing those complications and difficulties until the common understanding on both parts has been achieved. Understanding why it is emotional, why it is important for all of us. And the third point is understanding that integration is not a project with an end point. It is a project that never ends, because integration really is the dialogue, the events on global scale, the events on local scale, economic crisis, etc., may throw the society back several steps in terms of integration. Because in the context of limited resources, in context of political unrest, etc., relations become complicated. People tend to divide people on who is my own and who is my group and who is the stranger who is responsible for my troubles. And so there has to be understanding that we cannot think of integration as one-way process, but we have to take care of integration daily. And the biggest dream is that the ethnic question would not be used and abused in political games. So those people who belong to political parties, please open your ears to that and be careful with ethnic questions during the political pre-election games, because after the elections are over, we have to deal with the consequences.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah.
I will say that we have now fallen into the same trap like always. We are over-exaggerating the issues, we are over-politicizing the issues, and then we say, oh, state have to come and solve everything. And being involved in this integration policies in '97, what we have learned is that it's a very, very big part of that is a cultural process. The cultural process is taking time. 4 years is really very short time. I can ensure that in 20 years, changes have been enormous. And we entered the current stage really 4 or 5 years ago. And this current stage is, as I said, of much more substantial understanding of the inner need for having the common and normal society. And I suppose that is a process which is going on even if we will not have good parties in government, but just people have understood that, and people are going on. And what about education then? Here, the major thing, really, as I said already, because here the political consensus already have been achieved, to have the end of the segregation, have all kids in one school and so on. But here, what are the difficult issues are now emerging? Teacher training, where we get the teachers in this school, and so very practical issues, and they will need time. And for that, I am absolutely sure that in 10 years we will be in different situation. In 10 years, all kids will be in Estonian language kindergarten with all these kind of groupings. We will have younger teachers, and you young guys will be maybe also involved and be exaggerated to try your own capacity to be teacher in this common school. Tagasi kooli, back to school, because what is the greatest need really is the need in teachers.
Thank you very much. And Sergei, you have the last word. Say something positive, please.
Yes, I have a positive vision, a positive dream of a beautiful country where there's a lot of Russian people who speak Russian as a main language, and they are free people, and they like this status. And they overcome all of this historical tragedy that has been following the Russian nation through many centuries. And to some, the strategy is that a lot of people think that the Russian mentality is not there for freedom. It's not there for human dignity. It's just there to serve ideas or be part of a huge system. Thinking on a larger scale, I understand that it is not the purpose of Estonian state or society, but I see that the impulse that can come here from the success of local Russian community can give a strong worldwide signal to all Russians and to Russia and to people who are living at the moment in Moscow, St. Petersburg or Vladivostok, how it is possible to be Russian European, how it is possible to exercise all of those basic rights and freedoms, how it is possible to honestly support and also respect the idea that small nations have also their rights for a state, for a culture, for traditions. And if Estonia will be able in a larger historical scale to promote this kind of idea of Russianness that is connected strongly to European values, I think it would be a magnificent and a huge thing for the whole world.
Thank you again, Artemy, Vladimir, Marianna, Marju, and Sergei, and thank you for coming. And I'm sorry we're obviously a little bit behind the scheduled finish time. As I said, we need volume 2 and looking into some other issues and maybe more into future as well. And we're taking more questions. I'm sorry. We couldn't take all the questions tonight.
I'm sorry, can I ask the very last question? I think it will be interesting for everybody, if you don't mind, guys. Yeah. So, yeah, my name is Artemy. I'm sorry, I know you're very tired and you want to go home, but very last question. Without offense, and don't get me wrong, but when I was listening to you, And in my mind it popped up only one question, like the speakers, when you were invited here, what is your aim of your performances and statements of your speeches? Because for me, like, I'm sorry, but for me it seems like it's demagogy and like some political speculations. So if you wanna like arise understanding of some problems, I think that problems arise as far as you call something as a problem. So that's my question.
I just quickly comment that as one of the co-organizer and moderator, and you are wrong. Nothing like that. As I said, for private individuals start the astonishing image, and when we put together this panel, the idea was to have actually people with a different background, and here as well, as you can see, people have different background, and also even politically. We considered many people, but obviously these people who very glad they came. All of them are really well briefed, well educated about those issues. So it's. I'm sorry, obviously, if you got this impression, but it's nothing like that. We aim to speak as open as possible about those things, and if you not mentioned tonight as well, then obviously there was not like a full agreement here. I know they do disagree on many issues. What I would say, our aim as Astonishing Image is obviously we want to see a country where all the people can fulfill their potential, and no matter who they are. You know, so. I'm Estonian, and obviously I personally don't know also a lot of things about Estonian Russian image. I personally want to learn, and so this is why we invite those people. Yeah, what's your own background, if you can comment on that?
Yeah, I'm from Estonia. I was studying in a Russian school. I also know Estonian language.
Okay.
But why am I asking? Because for me, I don't see really like a big problem of Estonian Russians in every society. And I think like I have Estonian friends, I think Estonians have Russian friends, and we all can do a lot of things together, and I don't see really big problems about that.
But this is very simplified. Obviously, no one said there's a big problem. We as Astonishing Image, and I think a lot of people here as well, or all of them, I believe, want to see a country where we wouldn't have any of those, I don't know, you want to comment maybe?
I will just comment briefly. You are a perfect example of one of those well-integrated people who don't see a problem. Unfortunately, the statistical research shows that apart from you, there are a number of people who, with a different extent of problems, either through social-economic standing or through language barrier, or through different other aspects, and that's what we were talking about. That's what we research and etc.
Yeah, I want to say that only about I'm 25, and about 5 years ago I started. Well, no, 3 years ago I started to speak Estonian language very well, but before that I didn't have problems at all with Estonian, because I'm sure that it's about all in your mind, because I know that a lot of people who don't know Estonians, and then arise problems like they don't like me or something, because they can interact with themselves. Come on, if you live in Estonian government, you should know Estonian. It's Estonian government now. You should know Estonian. That's the thing. And even if you don't know Estonian, but you have understanding of that, there will be no problems at all.
I'm sorry, what is your name?
Arsen.
Please write about this and publish it, please.
Okay, thank you again. Just if you want to keep up with the future events, go to Facebook, Astonishing Image, and we're going to have another one in November. And thank you again, and good night.
One last comment from my side is also that one of the reasons we actually organize this event is not because we see the problems, but it was so sought after by all the expats who are writing to us, who are giving ideas. So many expats in Estonia don't really understand the Estonian-Russian situation. What's the historical background? What's really going on? Do you hate each other? And so on. So this is actually one of the main reasons to open up like some of the background at least. Thanks.